I remember when I first started learning English, I felt lost. It was hard. Every word seemed like a mountain. But then I realized something important. Learning English is like building a habit. You don't become strong in a day. It takes time. Just like going to the gym, at first you feel weak, but little by little you get better. I used to think I needed to study for hours every day, but I was wrong. The key is small steps. Just like when you start a workout routine. You don't need to run 5 miles the first day. You start slow, you do a little, and you keep going. I know it's not easy, but trust me, if you keep going, you'll see results. It's not about doing everything perfectly right away. It's about doing it every day. That's what will make the difference. I realized something important. If I really wanted to speak English fluently, I needed a plan. It wasn't enough to just study whenever I felt like it. I needed a routine, something simple, something I could do every day. So I decided to set a specific time every day to practice. I knew it had to be the same time each day, like a habit. That way, it would be easier. No excuses. I remembered a friend of mine. He told me he started with just 30 minutes a day. It sounded small, but he improved so much in just a few months. That inspired me. If he could do it, so could I. I set my alarm for 7 a.m. every day. At first, I wasn't sure if I could wake up that early, but I did it. And after a while, it felt normal, like brushing my teeth. Every day, I would sit down and practice my English for 30 minutes. Some days were hard. I didn't feel like doing it, but I knew that was normal. The first few days were the toughest, but after a while, it became part of my day. I couldn't imagine not doing it. I started to believe that this small step, this routine, was going to be the key to my success. Little by little, I was getting better. And I knew, even on the hard days, each small step was taking me closer to my goal. I knew speaking was important, but I realized listening was just as important. So I started adding English to my daily life in small ways. I would listen to podcasts and music while doing other things, like cooking, walking, or taking the bus. I remember putting on my headphones during my bus ride to work. It was a good way to practice without wasting time. While listening, I focused on the words and phrases I understood. Sometimes I would catch a word and think, what does that mean? I would try to remember if I had heard it before, or look it up. But what really stood out to me was how native speakers talked. They used certain expressions a lot. Words like or, were everywhere. It helped me feel more connected to the language. I started to notice I was getting better. Not only was my vocabulary growing, but I was also understanding more of what native speakers were saying. Before, I would get lost in conversations, but now I was catching more words. The sentences made more sense, and I could even guess the meaning of words I didn't know yet. It hit me. Listening is just as important as speaking. Without listening, I wouldn't really understand the language. I couldn't expect to get better if I wasn't hearing it all the time. It made so much sense. I was starting to get fully immersed in English. Every podcast, every song was bringing me closer to my goal. A friend of mine, who speaks English fluently, told me something that stuck with me. Active listening is key. You have to really focus on the words to improve your understanding. That really motivated me to keep going. I knew this was another important step to becoming fluent. I knew listening and speaking were important, but there was one thing I hadn't paid much attention to: vocabulary. So I decided to start learning new words every day. I wanted to make sure I was building a strong foundation. I found flashcards to be a great tool. They're simple but so effective. I would use them whenever I had a free moment waiting in line at the store, sitting on the bus, or even waiting for a friend to show up. I'd pull out my phone and look over the flashcards I made. Each word felt like a tiny step toward fluency. One day, while I was on the bus, I pulled out my flashcards. As I flipped through them, a new word caught my eye: delicious. I remembered the word from a conversation I'd heard in a podcast. That's right, I thought. I've seen this word before. It made me feel confident to recognize it and be able to say it in the right way. A few days later, I met up with some friends. We were chatting, and I remembered that new word. I said, "This pizza is delicious." They stopped for a moment and smiled. "Nice, your English is getting better," they said. That little compliment made my day. It made me feel proud and motivated to keep going. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that vocabulary was a huge part of learning any language. If I didn't know enough words, it would be hard to express myself clearly. I couldn't just rely on the few words I already knew. I needed a wide range of words to truly speak and understand English. So I promised myself to keep learning new words every day. I set a goal to learn at least 5 new words daily. I would review my flashcards, add new ones, and make sure to use the words I learned in my daily life. It wasn't always easy, but it was exciting to see how my vocabulary was growing. One afternoon, I went to the market to pick up a few things. I had just learned a new phrase in English: "How much does this cost?" I remembered it clearly and thought, why not use it here? When I reached the counter, I looked at the cashier and asked, "How much does this cost?" He looked at me a little surprised, but he smiled and answered, $5.99. I felt a rush of excitement. I had just used English in real life and it worked. I couldn't stop smiling as I paid for my groceries. It was such a small moment, but it felt huge to me. A few days later, I had the chance to use my English again, this time at work. I was serving customers at the cafe, and one of them asked me where the restrooms were. I was a bit nervous because it was the first time I was going to answer in English. But I took a deep breath and said, "The restrooms are in the back." The customer smiled and thanked me. My heart was racing, but I was so proud of myself for speaking up. The more I used English at work, the more comfortable I became. At first, I was scared of making mistakes, but I started to realize that it wasn't about being perfect. It was about practicing. I would have small conversations with customers about the weather or their orders, and with each interaction, I felt more natural. At first, I was shy to speak in English outside of my lessons or study time. But I learned that practicing every day, even in little ways, helped me so much. I started feeling like I was getting closer to the fluency I wanted. It wasn't about memorizing rules or vocabulary only. It was about using what I knew, making mistakes, and learning from them. I also noticed that the more I used English, the easier it became to think in English. Before, I would translate everything from Portuguese to English in my head. Now I could just understand things directly. It was like a switch was flipped. Fluency doesn't come from just studying at home. It comes from using the language in real-life situations, no matter how small. And when you mess up, don't worry, it's part of the process. Every mistake was a lesson. The more I practiced, the more I felt like a true English speaker. It had been a few weeks since I started my daily routine, but I started feeling a little down. The progress didn't seem fast enough. I was practicing every day, but sometimes it felt like nothing was changing. I couldn't help but wonder, is this really working? Is it worth all this effort? I thought about skipping my daily practice a few times. After all, if I wasn't seeing results, maybe I could just take a break. But then, I remembered something. I took a deep breath and grabbed my journal. I had started writing down my goals and my progress every day. I flipped through the pages and read about all the small victories I had achieved. There was the time I used a new phrase at the market and when I helped a customer at work in English. I had even made a few friends who spoke only in English with me. It wasn't always perfect, but I was moving forward. That's when I realized something important. It wasn't about seeing huge changes every day. It was about the little steps I was taking every single day. The slow progress was still progress. I thought about how long it took me to get comfortable with my own language, Portuguese. I didn't learn it in a day, a week, or even a month. It took years. And the same goes for English. Fluency doesn't happen overnight. It's a long journey and it takes time. I knew that now. As I sat there, I smiled. I had come so far. I looked at the things I had written in my journal and felt proud. Yes, there were days when it was hard. There were times when I felt like giving up. But I had also grown stronger. Each day, I was learning something new. A few days later, I had a moment that made me feel completely different about my journey. I was talking to a friend at work when she asked me something in English. I answered quickly without thinking. The words just flowed out of me. I didn't have to pause or translate in my head. It was like I was speaking my native language. For a moment, I just stood there, smiling. That moment made everything worth it. It was proof that all my practice was paying off. The more I practiced, the more natural it felt. I understood now that fluency comes with time and patience. I couldn't expect results to happen in a week or a month, but if I kept going, kept practicing every day, I would get better. Slowly but surely. It wasn't always easy, but the more consistent I was, the more I saw the changes. It was those small moments like answering without thinking that kept me going. Every time I reached a little goal, it made me believe in myself more. I realized that even on the hard days, the most important thing was to keep going. I knew that, as long as I stayed patient and practiced every day, I would reach my goal. The journey was long, but it was worth it. All I needed to do was trust the process. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself. A smile spread across my face. I felt different today. I felt closer to fluency than ever before. It wasn't just about the words I knew or how well I could speak. It was about how far I had come since I first started. I remembered the days when I felt lost, when I wanted to give up because I wasn't seeing quick results, but now I could see the progress. It was clear. I thought back to the beginning. I was scared, nervous, and unsure. I didn't know where to start or how to improve. But here I was, standing in front of the mirror, confident that I was on the right path. I had learned so much already, and I knew there was still more to come. But that was okay. It was all part of the journey. Turning to the camera, I spoke directly to you, the viewer. I know that learning English isn't easy. It takes time, and sometimes it can be really frustrating. But I promise you, consistency is the key. Small steps every day will get you there. I paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. If I can do it, so can you. I wanted to remind you that no matter how slow the progress feels, you are moving forward. Each new word, each new sentence is a step closer to fluency. So start small. Listen to English every day. Learn one new word, even if it's just one. Practice speaking whenever you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be consistent. And remember, there will be hard days. Days when you feel like you're not making any progress. But keep going. Those days will pass and you will improve. I believe in you. Keep going. Stay consistent. And before you know it, you'll be looking at yourself in the mirror, just like I am now, feeling proud of everything you've accomplished. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to hear about your journey. You've got this.